Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here. Let's start with some quiet. So find a comfortable place inside of yourself and with yourself in your particular surroundings. And note those surroundings with all of the awareness that you can bring to this moment. Note the ground that you're sitting on and feel its sturdy, willing support. Note your environment and whether everything about it is welcome or only some things about it are welcome and others may be feeling intrusive or distracting. Welcome all of that. Acknowledge it for the real truth of right now. And notice your breath. With a full and clear intentional inhale, ride that wave in, and then ride the wave back out of the exhale. And then see how many more waves of breath you can surf. How much are you willing to be held by these moments, by these sure and willing breaths? Fully embracing the truth that the mind has things to do and reminders to give and memories to have. At the same time, we can carve out some space to simply be held, to give our active mind over to a quieter, more sensing, less thinking place in our consciousness. The breath will take us there if we let it. Return again to the next inhale, the one to which you're willing to let go toward. And the more willingness we have for that letting go into the inhale, the more readiness we have to then release into the exhale. And the work is not to be fully in it for any prescribed length of time, but to gently stretch out those spaces of ease, those places of quiet, that feeling tone of surrendering. Just to extend them for one more space of one more breath is always going to be enough within any given moment. Shifting away from the notion that there has to be some argument with ourselves, some resistance or some struggle or battle with the persistent distractive mind, but simply a gentle recognition of that reality of a thinking being. And meeting that reality with the also and reality that we can make this space for ourselves. That we can leave our concerns on the beach and wade into the willing water to let the next wave of breath carry us. Every single time we remember to let go again into the next wave is the moment in which we have succeeded in meditation. Those are the moments to celebrate, not the ones where we punish ourselves for forgetting. Celebrating the times we remember. Reveling in that held space. Pay particular attention to the next few cycles of breath in and out. And then gently release your chin down toward your chest if you're seated. And if you're lying down, just curl up a little bit closer into yourself. And then wake up your physical form and return to an alert state, recognizing the situation immediately around you in this moment. Tonight, I'm going to talk about courage. And I'll start with a quote from To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And this is Atticus Finch talking to Jem, his son. He says to Jem, I wanted you to see what real courage is, instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. This little subplot of the much larger story that we know this classic tale to be is the relationship that happens when Atticus makes his son go and read to the mean old lady neighbor who is dying, Mrs. Dubose. And she is cantankerous and nasty and yells at the kids. And, she's every kid's worst nightmare. The old lady on the block that the kids don't want to go near. She's not the one giving them cookies and hugging them and squeezing their cheeks. She's the one yelling to get off the lawn, right? Little does Jem know, and Atticus doesn't tell him, that she's dying and is addicted to morphine. And he made Atticus makes his son read to her so that she gets a distraction from her pain. It's not to save her. It's not nobody's fixing her at this point. She's going to die. She's at the gate. But he wants to give his son a vision of courage that is small and simple and very rooted in the human existence, not the kind of courage that otherwise happens all over the book. It's in stark contrast to that hypermasculine and violent energy that pervades so much of what Atticus ends up negotiating with. And he reframes this idea of courage as persistence through times of difficulty. It took courage for Jem to sit down and read to her, and also took courage for Mrs. Dubose herself to do the ultimate surrender. The word courage comes from the French cœur, which means heart. And Brené Brown characterizes courage as is to speak all of our mind through our hearts, not through our intellect, not through our strategy, not through our way of negotiating our positions of power in the world, but simply to open up some honest and vulnerable heart space and share a truth that's difficult and scary. that's really courage. And it really does fly against what we typically imagine courage to be. We imagine it to be like that time when the birds flew into the engine of the big commercial airline in New York, and Captain Sully, thank goodness, was in the pilot's seat, and he lands the plane on the Hudson, and everybody survives, and he's heroic in every form. That's a type of courage, but it's not the everyday type of courage. Because how often does anybody get to save 200 people by some unlikely act? The everyday courage is for so many people to get out of bed, to wake up and say, I have a purpose in this world today, and I'm going to put one of my feet on the floor and upright myself, and I'm going to put the other foot on the floor and stand and venture out into this really cruel world. That is courageous. It's courageous to look people in the eye and say hello when you don't know them. And we can't underestimate the strength that requires, the fortitude that so many people really have to dig into and summon in order to do what others might think is a simple thing. The idea of packing up your life and moving to the opposite coast and taking a new job and meeting new friends, that is extraordinarily courageous, especially right now when life has been really pulled back in so many ways. When for 2+ years now, we've been told not to be with other people. It takes some courage now to be with others. For many people with all levels and degrees of anxiety disorder, things like going to the market or driving on the freeway or engaging in anything that's out of the realm of simple and private life, making a phone call is hard for people. And I think it's really worth remembering that as we go through our days, to say that it takes courage, it takes some strength to open up a heart and be, just be. Every person, every individual's courage meter is calibrated a little bit differently. When I was in my 20s, and I was just starting to practice yoga, and I was also just starting my new career as a high school English teacher. I'm a small woman, smaller than most people in any given room, including a high school English class. Physically small, and also energetically small at that time. However, I had the gift of this newfound yoga practice to be able to walk into these spaces and imagine myself in the power of a warrior posture. And that built some courage for me in a secret manner. Nobody had to know what I was conjuring in my head in order to feel both grounded and powerful and able to assert myself in a room full of large and boisterous and not always friendly and welcoming teens. So we can do these tricks. We can do these, conjure these images. I remember also around that time reading The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. It's a feminist retelling of the King Arthur legends. And in all the women in this book, were described, not all of them, but many of them were described as being able to summon the power, and they would imagine themselves get really tall. And then that energy ended up getting transmitted to those around them and gave them actual powers, not just imaginary ones. So I'll pause there and give us some time to sit with that. And so you might, if you choose to, imagine a recent situation where courage was required of you, and remembering that each person's courage meter has its own calibration. So go as small as you need to go in your mind and think, what did it take for me to show up in that moment? And extend inward some compassion and some nurturance of that, for the you that succeeded in that moment. Hold that image of yourself with great care. And hold it up as something worthy of admiration and rejoicing. And even better if it's something that many others take for granted. And what an achievement for us to show up with our whole hearts on display, vulnerable to trampling, and we did it anyway. That's worth noting. With your next inhale, bring awareness to your own heart center and feed that place with this notion of relative power, vision of yourself as larger and larger than you might physically be, and vision of yourself as significant and able to assert. And just a few more breaths here. Feeding a full and equally vulnerable and equally powerful heart. And then return awareness to your immediate surroundings. Bring some gentle movement back to your physical form. In the sacred texts of the yoga tradition, the causes of suffering are enumerated, and the final one on the list is that we fear death and that we are attached to the status quo. So if we are fearing death, we are fearing the one thing that will definitely happen. And we spend a lot of time in fear of things that never happen. When we forget that underlying all those fears is the one thing that will happen. Scholars also understand that this fear of death is an aversion that is the flip side of the same coin that gives us attachment. And so if we're fearing the ultimate demise of our forms in this lifetime, we are attached to the status quo. We don't want things to change. But they always are changing. And so fear of death is really the same thing as the fear of living. And it's in that realm where we do have power and agency. And if we can tap into that courageous heart to truly and fully live, the more so we do, the less that ultimate demise and the fear of it perhaps will hold sway in our emotional state. As we live, we are strengthening and preparing the body so that ultimately we can experience the discovery that the body is the least of who we are, that we are spirit living in this physical form. And it requires so much courage to face the truth that change is inevitable. We have to understand that the inevitability that this distinct life will resolve back into indistinction, the indistinction of the wide universe from which we all came and to which we will all return in whatever form we believe or imagine that to happen. I think that the act of loving another person, or even desiring another person, even if it falls short of love, that act is courageous because it implicitly acknowledges the temporal or temporary nature of the relationship. One of us is going to go before the other, usually. And so in that friction of connecting, knowing that the connection is tenuous in the larger scheme of things, that we're still willing to do it, that we're still willing to live, knowing the pain that may lie just around the corner. So this notion of courage is not that different than the notion of a simple reenactment every day of faith in this life as it's showing up in this moment. Let's come to just another short round of quiet, contemplative sitting space or reclining space where we're inviting the breath in, recognizing that it will quickly change and die away into the next breath. And what a gift each one of those breaths is. And what an act of faith it is to welcome this very tenuous temporal thing and to give ourselves over to it again and again and again. Noticing yourself in the midst of each moment. Perhaps taking the opportunity to launch a small-scale celebration of the willing, brave self to continue on to the next fleeting breath. This is a poem conveniently titled Courage by Anne Sexton. It is in the small things we see it, the child's first step, as awesome as an earthquake, the first time you rode a bike wallowing up the sidewalk, the first spanking when your heart went on a journey all alone. When they called you crybaby or poor or fatty or crazy and made you into an alien, you drank their acid and concealed it. Later, if you faced the death of bombs and bullets, you did not do it with a banner. You did it only with a hat to cover your heart. You did not fondle the weakness inside you, though it was there. Your courage was a small coal that you kept swallowing. If your buddy saved you and died himself in so doing, then his courage was not courage, it was love. Love as simple as shaving soap. Later, if you have endured a great despair, then you did it alone. Getting a transfusion from the fire, picking the scabs off your heart. Then wringing it out like a sock. Next, my kinsman, you powdered your sorrow, you gave it a back rub, and you covered it with a blanket. After it had slept a while, it woke to the wings of the roses and was transformed. Later, when you face old age and its natural conclusion, your courage will still be shown in the little ways, and each spring will be a sword you'll sharpen. Those you love will live in a fever of love, and you'll bargain with the calendar. And at the last moment, when death opens the back door, you'll put on your carpet slippers and stride out. May we all have the courage to live fully through our final days with that nature of faith and source of love. Many, many thanks. Peace to all. Be well, everybody.